Hi everyone, it's Thursday and that means it's WARNO Devblog Day. Today is going to be a little bit longer than some of the recent ones we've had, and it's probably going to be a little bit controversial considering the conversations I've had with a few people already. So strap in and let's see what UGen have for us this week. So they've titled this 2 extra battle groups. Well, I'd actually title it as 2 extra divisions. I don't know why we're suddenly calling them battle groups again. But they say in last week's devblog we mentioned the 2 extra free-for-all divisions would make their way to WARNO. In today's post we'll be taking a good look at both battle groups. On NATO's side, not entirely unexpected, but a welcome addition nonetheless, the 11th Armoured Cavalry Regiment will become available. For the Warsaw Pact, the Armoured and heavy-hitting 119th Independent Tank Regiment, or Tank Division, whatever you want to call it here. It's going to just be called the 119th going forward anyway. And no, I'm not going to attempt to pronounce the Russian words there. So what can you expect from these 2 new divisions? Well, the 2 new divisions coming to WARNO will be playable in Skirmish or Multiplayer and give you eager beavers a fresh choice on the battlefield. We mentioned last week that these divisions will not feature any new unit models. That is not entirely true, as 1 unused unit from the Army General campaign will be included. What's more, we will also introduce several new variants of existing equipment. Each battle group will also feature its tailor-made slot allocation in each category: recon, infantry, artillery, etc. A final note, the source of these 2 WARNO divisions are regiments or brigade-sized formations. To ensure both have a full complement of interesting military hardware, we have detached elements from other divisions to beef up the battle groups, table of organisation and equipment. More on that later in the video. So the next subheading from them is the 11th Armoured Cavalry Regiment, and this division is probably the least controversial of the 2. So UGen say anybody familiar with the Cold War and NATO in West Germany will be aware of the 11th Armoured Cavalry Black Horse Regiment's combat role during any conventionally fought World War III scenario. Forward deployed and providing overwatch on the inner German border. The various squadrons of this regiment would fight a most important delaying action near Fulda, Bad Hersfeld and Bad Kissingen. During the full-scale Soviet invasion, no one was under any false impression. Life expectancy in the regiment was counted in hours, and the formation screening mission a sacrificial one. Deployed almost completely by itself along the inner German border, the regiment was a unique mechanized force. It featured substantial amount of tanks, and even had its organic air cavalry squadron made up of helicopter support. The Black Horse's wartime mission was to delay any attacking enemy long enough for fresh NATO reinforcements to mobilize and counterattack, even if it meant dying, calling that a successful fail. In real life, as in our war scenarios, the 11th Armoured Cavalry Regiment wasn't fighting entirely on its own. The 3rd Armoured Division was the formation nearest to the regiment's squadrons. Next to that, each NATO's main divisions close to the border would forward deploy one of their battalions. They would protect their parent division and provide critical support to the 11th Armoured Cavalry Regiment squadrons scattered along the front line. These forces included the Bundeswehr's 5th Panzer Division Panzergrenadier Battalion 152, consisting of Marder transported infantry, the Bundeswehr 12th Panzer Division Panzer Artillery Battalion 135, bringing M109A3G self-propelled artillery, the US Army's 8th Infantry Division 1st-68th Armoured, featuring the M1A1 tanks and M113 mounted mechanized infantry, the US Army's 113th Engineer Brigade 54th Engineer Battalion, deploying engineers and M728 combat engineer vehicles, the US Army's 32nd Air Defense Group 3-52nd Air Defense Artillery with its Eyehawks, and the Bundeswehr's Heimatsuchen and local BGS, aka the Federal Border Guards. So that's our explanation. So what are the 11th Armoured Cavalry Regiment like in WARNO? What do they get? So UGen say to better reflect the 11th Armoured Cavalry Regiment's smaller size as well as its strengths and weaknesses, we have given the battle group extra unit choices from other formations deployed in support. Recon will be the battle group's best category. The 11th was an entire regiment geared for reconnaissance, and it shows in-game. The category will have a full range of slots unlocked, all being cheap, plus lots of choices such as US Army Scouts and LRS, backed by German BGS. These are supported by the American Bradley CFV and Humvee AGL, as well as West German Green Archer Recon Radar. There will also be helo-based recon units, the OH-58C Scout and the OH-58 Kiowa Warrior Light Rotorcraft. This division's main feature will be the new M1A1 ACAV tank, also known as a Recon M1A1. This heavy tank features good optics and can be forward deployed. Like other Recon, while also featuring brand new skin, this impressive armor is limited to one tank per card, meaning that they occupy one slot each, aka you won't be bringing a lot of these. The tank category also features a good balance between availability and price. Options are fewer though, with the M1A1 in both standard and command vehicle variant, plus a handful of M728 combat engineer vehicles and the West German Jaguar II. Thanks to the makeup of the 11th Armoured Cavalry Regiment, the formation could depend on its own sizable organic helicopter support, which we recreated in the Helo category. While the regiment had priority over the most modern ground equipment as seen in the latest versions of the Bradley and Abrams tank, this wasn't the case for its gunships. Instead of Apaches, the battle groups counted on the older AH-1F Cobra and TOW Cobra variants. The new Sea Night, or Cobra Night Imaging thermal equipment, does make its appearance. You see, with the introduction of the Apache attack helicopters and Hellfire missiles, it wasn't deemed priority to upgrade the older AH-1F Cobras to more modern TOW 2 standards, even though this option did exist for export versions, including Japanese or South Korean variants. Starting in 1988, some Cobras were nonetheless upgraded with a Sea Night package, allowing the venerable attack helicopters to fire the TOW 2 anti-tank missiles. This new AH-1F Sea Night variant has 4 TOW 2 missiles, 2 19-round rocket pods, and an onboard nose cannon. It will also receive 10% ECM and the 11th Armoured Cavalry Regiment specific camouflage paint job. The logistics category is very cramped, with only a handful of slots being very pricey. There are several options for supply vehicles, either American or West German. Infantry is in pretty much the same place as logistics, with expensive slot availability. Choices are a bit more varied though. Most of the combat soldiers come in a single card each. Mech Rifles Law in M113 APCs, Aero Rifles, Panzer Grenadiers in the Marder IFVs, Heimatsuchen, as well as HMG and ATGM teams. The new unit to the Black Horse battle group is the Dismount Troopers. The regiment didn't have infantry squads, only 2-man scout teams. To reflect the reality on the ground, 3 of these teams have been merged to form one new combat squad, fielding 3 M16A2, 3 M249 saws and an AT4. These soldiers were originally trained in reconnaissance, so they will receive the security trait. Anti-air is not the regiment's strong point, with medium amount of slots quickly ramping in price. Only the Stinger team's Pivads and Heliborn OH-58CS are available. The West Germans contribute some Fliegerforce, and one card of Eyehawk provides a bit more of a punch. Artillery is again in a similar place, with identical slot availability. While choices are few, the units themselves are a bit stronger, with one card each of the M106A2 and the Panzer Morse self-propelled mortars, as well as the American and West German M109s. Air, on the other hand, is pretty strong, with a focus on F-16s and A-10 close support aircraft. Coming in a variety of flavours, almost all loadouts are represented except for Napalm. Eugen say, much like its Warsaw Pact counterpart, the 11th is a clear-cut battle group. Major strengths are in recon, tank and helo categories, but the division lacks infantry, artillery and anti-air. I think as far as this division goes, the most controversial thing is probably the recon tank. I've heard a few question marks about that this morning, but obviously we'll need to see how it plays in game before we make any extreme judgment, shall we say. Okay, moving on to the Warsaw Pact side, the 119th Independent Tank Regiment. Information about this particular unit is quite scarce, but we managed to do enough research helped by the community along the way to fill in the gaps. The 119th Independent Tank Regiment was stationed in the Bad Langzala part of the Soviet 8th Guards Army, the one spearheading the invasion across the Fulda Gap. Independent tank regiments in the group of Soviet forces in Germany, the GSFG, served as an exploitation formation, advancing deep into the enemy's operational rear once a breakthrough had been made. They would also serve to provide replacements or reinforcements to first echelon divisions. As such, the 119th can be seen as closely aligned to the 79th Guards Tank Division. The 119th actually showcases one of our minor deviations from real-life history, to ensure their in-game role is as exciting as possible while also addressing some community feedback. They have a little subheading here called A New Perspective. In real life, with the decline of the Soviet Army and the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the role of the Independent Tank Regiment became obsolete in the latter part of the 1980s. These formations were downgraded to motor rifle regiments, and many were disbanded soon after. Nothing of the sort will happen in WARNO's imagined lead-up to World War III. Furthermore, the most advanced tanks of the Soviet Union could deploy in the latter part of the decade, the T-80U and T-80UD being one of the latest models to see the light. Some players remarked that this particular variant was not deployed to the GSFG in East Germany, but rather held back in the USSR. As such, it could not be featured in-game in the 79th Guards Tank Division. This is indeed true. In our version of WARNO, the 79th Guards Tank Division didn't have an organic complement of the T-80U, but instead received them from the 119th Independent Tank Regiment. If you haven't added two and two together yet, the controversy is about to start. In real life, early models of the T-80U, like ours, were only built in very small numbers, 45 in total. These were used for testing in Ukraine. These tanks would have been sent to combat units in our war scenario. The T-80UD was built in larger numbers and posted to active units, but none in East Germany. Instead, they were positioned in the USSR. So the next little subheading is some upcoming changes. Now for our proposed changes. In our updated WARNO timeline, the following happens. The 119th Independent Tank Regiment is designated the 8th Guards Army's Armoured Fist for the intended breakthrough operations around Fulda at the start of the war. After other formations have breached the front line, the regiment would rush through. This means the battle group receives the T-80U plus the T-80UD tanks. This armoured reserve will also be featured as such in our upcoming Army General campaigns, where the regiment will form the core of the smaller manoeuvre group at the disposal of the 8th Guards Army. By separating the T-80B and T-80U, the new battle group will allow us to correct the perceived mistake of forward deployed T-80Us and at the same time create two new versions of the archetypal Soviet Armoured Division. So what does this mean in WARNO? Well, the T-80U and T-80UD will be removed from the 79th Guards Tank Division and made available only to the upcoming 119th Tank Regiment. The 79th Guards Tank Division will now chiefly be composed of the T-80B and T-80BV tanks. The new 119th Independent Tank Regiment will not have any T-80B, save for a handful of T-80BVK, as there wasn't a specific command version of the T-80U at the time. A Soviet Independent Tank Regiment would also have very little infantry of its own, in theory just a single battalion. However, in the case of the 119th, it could only count on one oversized company. That's why the 8th Guards Army has detached several additional formations to bolster the battle group in the field. These include elements from the 21st Independent Flame Battalion, with combat engineers providing most of the new battle group's infantry, plus the TO-55 flamethrower tanks. The 93rd Anti-Tank Regiment bringing the BRDM-2 Konkurs and the Rapira anti-tank guns. Either the 336th or the 486th separate helicopter regiment fielding the Mi-24, the 134th separate reconnaissance battalion, and the 8th Guards Army's HQ own ears and eyes, the 390th Cannon Artillery Brigade providing some of its towed heavy reserve artillery. Okay, so let's talk about what they'll actually get in the game. What does the 119th get in WARNO? So lots and cheap tank slots with access to plenty of T-80Us and T-80UDs, as well as some T-80 BVK command tanks. Additional forces include the TO-55 flamethrower tank, the BRDM-2 Konkurs and Rapira anti-tank guns. Infantry is lacking with few and expensive slots. There is only a single card of organic Motostrelki BMP, and acting as cannon fodder will be the Sapri in command regular and RPO variants, plus a handful of Spetsnaz. Being a regiment, logistics suffers from a mediocre amount of choices and few open slots. Artillery is pretty average with medium slots but few options. The battle group can deploy the 2S1 Grozdiger as well as the 2B9 Vaslek automatic mortars. There is also one more modern unit, and the new unit in fact from the Armoured General campaign, the 2A65 MSTA-B 152mm howitzer can also be fielded. With the 8th Guards Army's own recon battalion at the regiment's disposal, recon features plenty of cheap slots and multiple choices, but they're not actually listed here. AA is rather mediocre with some good options including the Tunguska, the MTLB Strela 10 and Igla teams, but no heavy or long range SAM systems, and there are only a limited amount of slots available. Helo forces are pretty strong with plenty of Mi-24V and Mi-24VP. And lastly, air is decent with numerous open slots at an average price. The modern MiG-29 and Su-27S fighters both available, as well as the Su-24M in Seed, bomber and new laser-guided bomb variant carrying 2 of the CAB 1500 KR guided bombs. However, there are no cluster or ATGM loadouts. They say in summary, the 119th Independent Tank Regiment is a battle group with clear strengths and weaknesses with powerful tank, helo and air categories, but lacking in inf, logistics and anti-air. So pretty much similar to the previous one. Okay, there is still more. Yes, this is a long video, I did warn you. There are some further revisions. The arrival of 2 new divisions means some changes to our existing roster of battle groups. These will mostly affect the Warsaw Pact's 79th Guards Tank Division, but NATO's 3rd Armoured Division will also see a small revision. The Soviet 79th Guards Tank Division will transfer its most modern armour in the form of the T-80Us and the T-80UDs to, you guessed it, the 119th Independent Tank Regiment. The remaining T-80BV cards will be adjusted accordingly in number. To make up for the loss of the latest T-80 models, 2 new units will find their way to the 79th Guards Tank Division. The T-80BV IZD .29, which here at UGen we have come to call the T-80BV Beast. This particular model is a late production T-80BV with more powerful engine and new tube-fired ATGM. It is 10 km per hour faster than the T-80BV and can fire the much improved Agona missile, which can also be found with the T-64, a brand new model. The Su-24M Cluster 2 is a new loadout for the strike aircraft, seeing a heavy bomb load of 8 500kg RBK 500 cluster bombs, compared to the original 8 250kg bombs. The plane, together with the Su-24M with laser-guided bombs found in the 119th Tank Regiment, will also receive a new livery. They go on to note that the 79th Guards Tank Division will further benefit from updated T-80B and BV models. They have already revised and much improved the T-80U, T-55 and T-72 vehicles in-game. The T-80B and the T-80BV are now done and will be implemented in-game soon. The final note is that for NATO, the 3rd Armoured Division will lose its LRS. These recon squads were deployed to the inner German border. They will now be featured in the new 11th Armoured Cavalry Regiment. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is everything for this week. Let me know down in the comments what you think of these changes, what you think of these 2 new divisions. As ever, UGen are keen for feedback. Thanks for watching, everyone. Please, as always, like, share, subscribe. Make sure you check out the other videos on the channel. I cover other games, and if you only really watch the WARNO content, YouTube will not actually tell you that I have uploaded videos for other games. I hope you all have a great weekend.